Foreclosures. It is crazy out there right now. There's all kinds of these things falling out of the sky. Atom, ATOM, which is the data provider, one of the bigger data providers for our industry, put out an article today talking about the stats, the recent stats. Now, it's no surprise to know that we're up pretty dramatically over last year. Actually, January to January is 36% increase. Across the board, it's running at a rate of 2 to 3 times what it was last year. Now, last January, we were still in some amounts of COVID shutdown and that type of thing. And so we didn't have, kind of all throttles open like we do today. However, we're going to talk about the various stages of foreclosure, the foreclosure process, because foreclosures are generally just understood by everybody to be just what's foreclosure? But there's actually 3 primary phases in foreclosures. There's the default phase, which is the first thing that happens. People will get a notice typically from the bank, usually written, a lot of times certified or hand processed with a server, process server will give you a note saying, listen, you're in default. You are behind in your payments. Here are your rights according to, this is all state law. Every state has a different law. There is no overriding, superseding federal government law, but each state has their own rule, and there's a process. It'll give you a certain amount of time to catch up on payments. In some states, they can require you catch up the entire payment. In other words, if you got a $100,000 mortgage, you're behind $8,000, they could tell you have to pay all 100, not just 8. Most states, about 48 or so of the states, you have a right during a period of time to pick up just to be able to catch up the default part, the 8,000 portion. But anyway, it goes from that stage then to what's called the NTS here in California. It's called Notice of Trustees Sale. You guys might know it in most states as auction. It will go to an auction, and there's a period of time that will lead up to the auction, and then the auction is the typical, what we'd all think of as foreclosure, which is they're selling your house on the courthouse steps to the highest bidder that pays off their loan. And that's called the auction process. And then once that is done, if nobody bought the house at auction, it reverts back to whoever called the foreclosure. Typically, it's your first lien holder, your first mortgage company, your first deed of trust holder. So the beneficiary of the deed of trust, the loan on your house, is the one typically who will call the loans due. Now, sometimes there's taxes that are in default, property taxes, things like that. Goes through the same process. They have basically an auction at the courthouse steps, and they can sell your house off for the back taxes. Today meaning probably the last 20 years, almost all loans that originate in the United States are PITI loans, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance loans. So there's no issue in most cases with newer loans with them being behind in payments, people being behind in tax payments. Nonetheless, believe it or not, there are 40% of the homes in the U.S., 40 million homes are debt-free, and people lose those homes all the time because they don't pay a small amount of taxes. So it's really an odd situation. Nonetheless, the process is the same. So let's just go through. I'll give you the top 5 in all of these areas as of January, where we're seeing the worst of all 3 of those. We're going to start off first with the foreclosure starts, or what we call the default stage. The first notice the bank gives you when you haven't made a payment and say, listen, you've got this amount of time, and if you don't pay us X within Y amount of time, it's going to end up on the courthouse steps. So going from number 5 to the worst, 5 to 1, 5th state last month that had the worst number of foreclosure starts, state of Illinois, primarily led by Chicago. Chicago is in the top 4 or 5 in the country. New York, number 4, state of New York. Number 3, Florida. Number 2, Texas. And can we guess what number 1 is? Yes, it is my home state, the Golden State, the land of fruits and nuts out here, state of California. We are not surprisingly, we've got huge price drops in most markets, and some people are literally getting underwater on their mortgages right now. So number 1 is California. So what this is this would be the equivalent of, we've talked in the past about the canary in the mine shaft. So this would be the equivalent of that. There are going to be more homes going to auction down the road, and then later on, more homes that will be owned by the bank in the state of California than any other state. So you want to play the foreclosure game, California is a place to do it in terms of numbers. I would advise against it because of all the rules. And the state of California has stuck their nose in that process, and it makes it very, very difficult to do what's called an arm's length transaction. In other words, you go to the courthouse steps, you pay your money, you get the ownership of the house, and that should be it. You record the deed, the auctioneer's deed, and you own the house. But in California, they've put a new step in there that basically says the state of California has the right to go in and buy that house from you within, I think it's 120 days, something like that. So they decide if they want to take your house for what you paid plus 8% interest. Now the state of California will charge you 10% if you owe money, but they will pay you 8% interest, and basically you have to sit on your hands for about 4 months. You don't even know if you really own it, because they could take it back and they could give it to a state employee or anybody they want at that point. So it's really not, they've interfered with private contracts once again. I'm going to do a video one of these days on just California. How pissed I am about these guys and all their interference. But that would be a place, if you're really looking for big volume, California's the place to go. Okay, then we go to the next step. The next step is states that have the worst auction rates right now. And starting and actually I'm going to give you the top cities that are going to be in the top auction rate. So these are ones that are having imminent auction lining up. Number 5, city of Riverside, California. Number 4, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Number 3, New York, New York. Number 2, Chicago. And number 1, the state of Detroit. Last month was 783 auctions. The city of Detroit, Michigan. So as I've told you before, I'm a landlord in Detroit. It's not by choice, but nonetheless, it's a tough area. So if you want to be in the auction business, that's a great way to go. And that's what I would do. All right, then we go to the worst actual REO stage, which means it's post-auction, and these are the properties that became owned by the lender during this period of time. Number 5 in states, Delaware, state of Delaware, our president's home state or current home state. Number 4, Illinois. Once again, we're getting some clues here about this state in this area, right? Illinois is looking pretty bad. Number 3, Michigan. Number 2, New Jersey. And believe it or not, the number 1 state is the state of Maryland. And that was a surprise because Maryland has a better than normal economy. Primarily because of all the government employees that live there, but it is number 1 in terms of worst state to lose properties back to the bank last month. Going from the cities, the worst 5 worst cities in the United States: Fayetteville, North Carolina, number 5. Number 4, city of Bakersfield, California. Number 3, Cleveland, Ohio. Number 2, Detroit, Michigan, and number 1, down on the border, southern border of the U.S., Laredo, Texas. Worst number of homes to go back to the bank. So these are places where, and properties that going back to the bank are typically areas that could be underwater. They're typically areas with just not enough buyers. I mean, it rarely happens at auctions that houses go all the way back to REO. It used to happen ad nauseum. I mean, from 2008 to 2014 even, half or more of the properties didn't get bought at auction and ended up going back to the banks. Since then, almost nothing has gone back to the banks. Once again, last month, here we are, stuff's going all the way back to the bank. So that's the worst from those standpoints. So what you've got is it's scattered everywhere across the whole United States. When you combine all of these factors, the worst places in the United States right now for foreclosures: California, 3rd place. Pennsylvania, 2nd place, and the state of New York is the hotbed of foreclosure activity in the United States right now. So we'll update this as it goes, but it's getting to be a little bit on the Wild West-ish side, and pretty soon these things will be coming out like water, and there'll be a ton of them. I mean, to have one city have 783 properties, the city of Detroit, which has a huge shrinking population. It used to be above 1 million. Now I think it's someplace between 400,000 and 500,000 people live there. That many people have moved away from Detroit. And to have almost 1,000 foreclosures, that's a lot in 1 month. That's a huge amount. So anyway, keep your guys' eyes and ears open. There's opportunity in the foreclosure market. When I say foreclosure, I'm talking about the whole thing. Your best bet, of course, is to get it pre foreclosure pre-auction, where you can buy it directly from the seller and where you'll have less competition buying it subject to that type of thing. But in order to do that, you've got to be kind of on your game. You got to get it the minute it happens, and you got to be ready to go out there and take action. You got to take action quick, because find out, first of all, if you were to do that, find out what your state rules are, the state you want to participate in. And because every state has different rules. Some states have redemption, and you got to be careful on that. In fact, I should do a video on that. What is redemption? Because California introduced into a non-judicial state the concept of redemption by the state itself. Redemption is usually a death knell. I would not recommend ever buying a foreclosed property in a state with redemption, because you don't know if you're ever going to own it or not. There's a period of time when the seller could come back and catch you up with a statutory rate of interest, and you're stuck by putting out the money on day one, and you can't do a darn thing about that house until the redemption period is over and nobody comes back to redeem the property. In fact, there's horror stories all over the place about people who bought at auction, went in, totally rehabbed the house, getting ready to sell it, and the seller comes back and was able to leverage the fact that the house is now rehabbed, it's in great shape, and they could get a new loan based on the value, the current value of the house. It was done on the dime of the person or persons who bought it at auction, and they ended up losing all of their money. They didn't get the money they put back into the house. They got the money that they paid for the house, plus the statutory rate. Some states are 5%, some are 10%, plus that interest back. And so these guys made out like a bandit. They had a foreclosure on their record, but they got a house worth twice as much, and they were able to get a new loan on it and boot out the investor. And there's nothing that the investor who made that mistake can do. You're stuck. So you got to be very, very careful. If you guys want more information about foreclosure courses, you guys can reach out to Ashley and or DM me, and we have a course that just deals with, it's called Equity Buyout Clinic, and it's a 5-week course, and we can get you a copy of that if you're interested. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody, and that is it today.